Episode 335 Sun and Sails. This is the Change Underground. I'm your host, John. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Quote Surging renewable energy output has pushed fossil fuel fired generation down to record low levels in Australia's biggest electricity grid, triggering another big fall in wholesale prices. The Australian Energy Market Operator, AEMO, which runs the national electricity market covering the eastern states, said power prices had tumbled in the 3 months to the end of March. Average prices were $83 a megawatt hour for the period, a 10.5% decrease compared to the previous 3 months, and a whopping 62% lower than the September quarter last year. End quote. That was taken from the ABC site dated Friday the 28th of April 2023 and entitled Drop in Wholesale Power Prices as Renewable Energy Generation from Wind and Solar Grows, AEMO finds. Link in the show notes. And this is good news. There are plans afoot to set up offshore wind generation along the west coast of Tasmania and the Roaring 40 trade winds and full-size solar farms across the whole continent. Interestingly, most of the solar generation at the moment in Australia comes from rooftop panels on homes. We have 20 on ours. The bad news is that power prices at the sharp end keep rising. The last time they really jumped a lot was in the early 21st century. We were told the cost of the gold-plated poles and wires were the cause. Nowadays we are being told it is again the poles and wires and we need more of them. I smell a rat, but that's for a different episode. On the question of solar energy, a piece from the New Yorker entitled India's Quest to Build the World's Largest Solar Farms. Quote, every morning in the Tumakuru district of Karnataka, and I apologise to my Indian listeners, a state in southern India, the sun tips over the horizon and lights up the green and brown hills of the Eastern Ghats. Eventually, the sunlight reaches a sea of glass and silicon known as Pavagada Ultra Mega Solar Park. Here, within millions of photovoltaic cells lined up in rows and columns like an army at attention, electrons vibrate with energy. The panels cover 13,000 acres, or about 20 square miles, only slightly smaller than the area of Manhattan. End quote. 13,000 acres is about 5,260 hectares and 20 square miles is around 51 square kilometres for the rest of the world. So not an inconsiderable piece of real estate, and it produces sufficient power just 20 minutes after sunrise for 100,000 Indian homes. And at 1,300 it's producing enough for 1 million homes, and that's its peak output. This particular farm is part of a push for more solar power in India. From further on in the piece, and it's a long read but recommended, link in the show notes, comes the following, quote, sunlight is the most abundant source of energy on the planet. At any given moment, billions of megawatts of solar power are hitting the Earth's surface. Humans could meet all their energy needs by harnessing just 0.01% of it. According to the Carbon Tracker Initiative, such an undertaking would require an area slightly larger than the size of California. A lot of land, but less, it turns out, than the current footprint of fossil fuel infrastructure. And with help from other energy sources, such as wind and water, this area shrinks, end quote. About 424,000 square kilometres gets you the real estate equivalent of California, or about 8,300 of the solar farms mentioned. The world is a big place, about 510 billion square kilometres of land surface, so finding the space for solar farms should not be difficult, even if they have to be placed next to current or in need of development pumped hydro batteries. The good thing about those is that then you have the power available 24 hours a day. See episode 163, Pumped Hydro and a Hazelnut-driven food system, for more on this tried and tested battery system. Old mines, dams and natural geological features are all good candidates for this sort of battery. While the sun shines, water is pumped uphill to a storage reservoir, creating potential energy. And once the demand for energy exceeds that produced by the panels, water is dropped to a lower reservoir through the same pumps that put it up high, turning them into hydro generators. The water can, in theory, be used indefinitely. In reality, there's evaporation and so on. Bladders and compressed air could also do the job. The great advantage of the pumped hydro system is that we've worked out all the kinks in the system, having used hydroelectricity for over a century. Things are doable. The funding, the will, and the need to make these sprawling structures literally bomb-proof could take time. Of course, price incentives put in place by regulators, governments, and so on would hasten the process. And in another piece from the New Yorker, the climate crisis gives sailing ships a second wind, comes the notion that sails could return to the high seas, not just for the adventurous single-handed round-the-world types, but for cargo vessels. Put from your mind square-rigged barkentines or even gaff-rigged schooners, or for that matter the junk-rigged treasure fleets of the early Ming dynasty. Now think aircraft wings. Quote, "Of course you can't just slap an aeroplane wing on the deck of a ship and expect it to work. Aeroplane wings provide lift but rely on jet engines to provide thrust. A wing sail, in contrast, must provide thrust of its own, from the wind. Engineers are now studying how many wings they can cram onto the deck of a ship and how high they can go without threatening the stability of the vessel." End quote. The sort of rigid sails on current America's Cup-type boats would fit the bill. Those in the know, and I'm just scratching the surface of this myself, suggest the junk sails are fairly close to aeroplane wings, with engineers designing these things for ships that retract like a reef junk sail to fit under bridges. Now, serendipity is a wonderful thing. I have a new podcast in the planning on sailing a small dinghy/micro cruiser across the northern coastline of Tasmania and up to Flinders Island in the Bass Strait. So I've been delving deeply into the most convenient and safest forms of cruising rather than racing, and the junk rig is looking good. More on that when I get closer to releasing the first of what should be about 4 seasons on the process and the journey. Anyway, sails on cargo ships make sense. The idea is to reduce at first the use of diesel, and the diesel used on shipping is the nastiest, most polluting of all. I've seen cruising yachts with wind generators and solar panels slapped on them, so maybe a sail and electric option could be with us soon enough. And given that it currently costs a bulk transporter of, say, wheat around $24,000 a day, for fuel, anything that reduces that is a price signal the bean counters at the shipping lines will jump all over. So Australia is moving with increasing rapidity towards a renewable grid, the Indians too, and we could soon be seeing sails return to the seas. There is hope, dear listener, there is hope. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week. This has been a JM Podcasting Services production. Link in the show notes.